Tov, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Kosher Curiosities series. This is our 8th installment of the series where we look at different areas of kashrut deeply using the Sefer Pninei Halacha. Tonight's class is actually a continuation of our last class, Kosher Curiosities 7, where we began looking at the laws of Bishul Akum, laws of a non-Jew cooking food for a Jew, which is prohibited. We did mention in last class, and we went in depth to speak about that there are two exceptions to the rule. That is, if a food can be eaten in its raw state, then it is fine for a non-Jew to cook that food. So, for example, an apple, we eat apples raw all the time. So if a non-Jew was to cook an apple and bake an apple in the oven, it would be no problem for a non-Jew for a Jew to eat that apple. And another exception that we gave was that the food must be placed on a king's table. So if it was something that was not be worthy to be put on a governor or king's table, then that is also a food that would be permitted to be eaten by a Jew if a non-Jew were to cook it. We're going to continue with the second part of this section of Bishul Goyim, Bishul Akum. Again, Akum stands for Avodat Kochavim. You ever hear that term? It's a shortened term for Avodat Kochavim, worshippers of the stars, the non-Jews. So we are speaking today with, I'm going to discuss a few very relevant topics about how to have your non-Jew maybe involved in the cooking process, even though, and it would still be allowed. So that's where we're continuing here on using the Sefer Pninei Halacha. This is what he says. Kasher Yisrael shutaf bebishul. If a Jew has some sort of involvement in the cooking process, even if he just assists a little bit. For example, he improved the food by mixing the contents of the dish while it was cooking. Hatavshil kasher, then the cooked dish is kosher. Kal vahomer, it goes all the more so. Shatavshil kasher ima Yisrael henichu ala esh. For sure, if the actual Jew took the pot or the pan and placed it on the fire, or hidlik et ha'esh mitachtav, or he lit the fire underneath, wherever the element, or higbir ota be'ofen shemo'il lebishul, or he increased the flame in a way that would again make and improve the dish, then certainly that would be permitted. Legabe pat lamadu, he says, we learned with regards to bread, this was a few classes ago, שגם השתתפות בהדלקת האש לפני תחילת האפייה מועילה להכשיר את הפת שנאפתה אחר כך על ידי גוי. That even by involving yourself in turning on the fire would make bread that was baked by a non-Jew kosher because you had a part in it. Ulam legabe bishul nechleku. However, with regards to cooking food, not baking, the rabbis are at odds. Yesh mekilim besovrim shedin tafshil kedin pat. Some are lenient and say that the laws of cooked foods are the same as bread and baking. וכל שישראל הוסיף קיסם לאש שעליה יבשלו אחר כך את התבשיל, and any Jew that adds and even a twig to the fire where the food is going to be cooked, or even if he lowers the flame of a gas flame and then increases it again, since he was a partner in the strengthening of the fire, any dish that the goy is going to cook afterwards, on that fire, it would be kosher. So as long as a Jew throws in a twig to the fire or raises the heat or turns on the fire, certainly any food from that fire that the Jew turned on, that the non-Jew cooks with, would be kosher. This is the opinion. V'kachu minhag yotzei Ashkenaz. This is the opinion of the Ashkenazim. It's what the Rama brings down in the Shulchan Aruch. This is how he holds. As long as a Jew turns on the fire, it is sufficient to now allow the non-Jew to cook food for you. However, there are those who are strict. Vesovrim, and hold. It's only with regards to bread did we allow a non-Jew to bake for us if a Jew added to the flame. Because bread is an essential food for a man. But with regards to cooked food, only if there's actual involvement while the cooking is taking place, either by placing the pan on the fire, or adding fire in a way that is improving the food, that would make the food kosher. And this is the halacha according to the Sepharadim. This is what the Shulchan Aruch brings down. According to the Sepharadim, you actually have to have involvement in the food. Just turning on the fire would not be enough if you are a Sephardic Jew. Now, there are some exceptions to this that he's going to bring down, specifically with regards to restaurants and catering, where even some Sephardim hold like the Ramah, where just turning on the fire is allowed. But generally, if you are a Sephardic Jew and you are at home and you have a non-Jewish nanny or maidservant, whatever, and she is cooking for you or he is cooking for you, you have to have involvement in the food, such as increasing the flame to make the food better, or actually stirring ingredients, something along those lines. But the actual stringency of the Sepharadim and the leniency of the Ashkenazim goes further. Ledugma, he gives an example. Let's say you are frying an omelet, or you're frying meat on a pan. Ledata mekilim, according to those who are lenient, such as the Ashkenazim, the Jew can just turn on the fire. Now the non-Jew can sit there and fry 100 omelets. He can grill 300 steaks and burgers if he wants. But according to the Machmirim, as long as the frying and the grilling is taking place, the Jew has to be the one placing the omelet, the egg, into the pan, or pieces of meat onto the pan. Turning on the fire or increasing the fire only helps for that first omelet or for that first meat. So the Jew constantly has to be involved in the making for it to be excluded and not be into the category of Bishul Goy. Now, Rav Melamed actually gives a strict law. He says, since today, all the Jews live together, Sepharadim and Ashkenazim live together. And we know that the Sepharadim and the North African Jews have the custom to be machmir. Even though this law is rabbinical, we should practice according to those who are machmir, according to those who are strict, like the Sepharadim. However, after the fact, since we are indeed talking about a rabbinical law, we can indeed teach according to those who are lenient. Now, in places when there's not actual personal connections between the person cooking and those who are eating. Kegon, for example, like a communal kitchen or a catering hall, or or a restaurant. The chef that's in the back of the restaurant cooking, he's not going out and talking to the those who are dining in his restaurants. In that situation, if you can say that this restaurant is totally kasher according to those who are mekil, aval kashrut mehadrin. But if you want to label it kashrut mehadrin, which is a higher level kashrut, then you have to be machmir. You have to act like those who are machmir. Make sure that there is a Jew in there at all time taking part in the cooking process. Rav Ovadia Yosef in his Shelot Shuvot, his response to Yabia Omer, speaks about this, and he says even though that the Sepharadim are machmir, he says when a non-Jew is cooking for many people, for example, like a catering hall or a restaurant, we can be mekil, and many of the Sepharadim are mekil in that situation. However, there were Sephardic rabbis that held differently, such as the Or Letzion, Rabbi Zion Bar Shaul. He said, no, you still have to have a Jew there taking part in the cooking process, even though the chef is not really going out there and has no personal connection to the people who are eating his food. Okay, so there is a difference between Sepharadim and Ashkenazim. Let's go on. Yes, Omrim, there are those who say, Shekeshem shekilu b'shat hatzorech liknot bat mipartel goy, even though there are those that permit buying bread from a non-Jewish baker, non-Jewish bread. We spoke about this in our previous class. Hoil ve'en kol kach kiruv da'at b'ma'afim shenefim avur anashim rabim. Since there is not really this close connection between the bakers and those who are eating the bread, same thing, we should be lenient when it comes to a non-Jewish chef who is cooking for the public. Like we said, a chef in a restaurant, he has no connection to the people eating. And in times of need, certainly if he cooks, even without a Jew sitting there and taking part in the actual cooking process, it would be fine. However, according to most poskim, the leniency or the permissibility of pat palter, of eating from non-Jewish bread, was specific because, like we said, bread is an essential food for man. But with regards to cooked foods, the rabbis did not make any differentiation in their decree. And the prohibition of eating non-Jewish cooked food would apply whether the non-Jew is in a personal residence or if it is in a public kitchen or a catering hall. Makes no difference. Omnam, however, b'sha'at hatzorech, in times of need, when there are other reasons to be lenient, efshar lismoch al hamekilim bazeh, a person can be mekil in this. Yesh mi sheomer, there are those who say sheha-isur hu ka'asher hagoy mevashel bebeto. Some says when the non-Jew is only cooking in his house. Aval im hu mevashel bebet Israel, but if the non-Jew is cooking in a Jewish person's house, and isur, there is no prohibition. However, lema'aseh horu poskim sheha-isur hu gam kasher hagoy mevashel bevet Israel. The prohibition still applies even though you have a non-Jewish nanny cooking in your home. The prohibition still applies, and so you would have to have involvement in the food either by turning on the fire or having actual involvement in the cooking process. But because of the fact that there are poskim, there are rabbis that hold that it doesn't apply in a Jewish home, you might find many rabbis that are lenient even for the Sepharadim to allow a Jew just to turn on the fire and not have constant involvement in the actual cooking of the food. He makes a point over here in his notes with regards to Tzahal in the IDF that the general rule in the Tzahal is that they only have Jewish chefs that are there cooking the food, and certainly they have non-Jewish chefs, but there's always a Jewish chef there turning on the fire, and to make sure that if the fire was to go out, to make sure that it was a Jewish person that always puts it on. And there's different reasons why in that situation we don't require a Jew constantly being involved in the making of the food. Number one, like we mentioned, you're cooking for tzahal, you're cooking for a very, very large group of people, so there's not that personal connection. Also, you're in a Jewish home. Tzahal is a Jewish institution. Also, the non-Jewish chef is being commanded by his supervisor and being watched over his supervisor, and therefore, and also it's extenuating circumstances, right? They're always on call. Members of the army are always on call, and again, these would be similar reasons why. Again, we could be a little bit more lenient when you have a nanny in a home cooking for you. All you need to do is turn on the fire, not have active involvement in the food. You have someone watching over her or him. It's in a Jewish home. So those are reasons why even Sepharadim are a little bit more mekil when it comes to a nanny in the home. However, those who are machmir, like the Shulchan Aruch, again, that would be the top level of kashrut, as he mentioned before. That would be kashrut shemehadrin. Let's speak about those who are infirmed and not feeling well. If you have someone who's not well and he needs a certain dish on Shabbat to be cooked for him, even if his sickness is not something that is life-threatening, a person is allowed to ask a non-Jew to cook for him a dish. What's the reason? Because asking a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbat is prohibited only by a rabbinical enactment. With regards to someone who is sick, the rabbis permitted doing such and asking a non-Jew to do a melacha. Bichlal ha'eter, included in this permissibility, is levakesh migoy levashel b'Shabbat lechole. Person can ask a goy to cook for this sick person. Gam hitiru lechole leechol me'atavshil goy. And not only that, we allowed the chole, the sick person, to eat from this tafshil goy. Now, the question remains: what happens if there's leftover food? Im nishan me'atavshil lemotzei Shabbat. So the non-Jew cooked for this sick person a big pot roast, and there's leftover from now Saturday night. There's leftover pot roast. Yes, omrim shemutar gam lebriim leechol mimenu. Some say that even healthy people can now eat from this pot roast after Shabbat. Why? Because it was cooked by a non-Jew permissibly for the purpose of the sick person. But yes, omrim, and there are those who hold shemotzei Shabbat gam lachole atzmo asur. That on Motzei Shabbat, even the sick person himself cannot eat from this. Why? Because the goy cooked it for him. And now you're at a time where anybody can cook for you. You can cook, you can get your best friend, your father. It's not Shabbat anymore. So if you have an opportunity for Jews to cook for you, now that even though you're sick, you cannot cook, you cannot eat from the food that the goy made for you on Shabbat. You're only allowed to eat from it because it was Shabbat and the Jew couldn't cook for you. But now a Jew is able to cook for you, so therefore you wouldn't be allowed to eat from this food after Shabbat. And this is the opinion of most Aharonim, that food that was left over, that a goy cooked for someone who was sick on Shabbat, cannot be eaten any longer, even by the sick person himself. If you have someone who's elderly or sick that has a non-Jewish caregiver who helps him eat, as long as the patient has the ability to turn on the fire which the goy will be cooking from, or the oven where the goy is going to bake or roast, or then the elderly patient or the sick patient should do his best to do so. And if he's not able to do so, it is a mitzvah for his children or his family members to do whatever they can to prepare dishes for him, and keep those dishes in the fridge for him. And then the goy can heat them up, and they're already been cooked, so he can heat them up for them. In extenuating circumstances, where he has no family members that can bring him cooked foods, since he is sick, and he really needs to eat, we can rely on the few opinions that are mekil, are lenient. But family members of this sick person or this elderly person, or anyone coming to visit them, they would not be allowed to eat from those tavshilim. The final thing we're going to learn today is what happens if a non-Jew cooks food for a Jew, and we know that's not allowed. What is the status of those pots? So what is the status if a non-Jew comes into your kitchen, takes one of those pots and cooks with them, and you didn't have any involvement? You didn't turn on the fire. You weren't there stirring the dish, putting in the spices. There was nothing. He just did it on his own. So what is the law? What is the status of the pots? Your own pots. So says the Pnei Halacha, kelim shegoy bishel bahem tavshilim. If you the utensils that the goy used to cook dishes with, lamrot shekol makivei tavshil hayu kesherim. For sure, even though we're talking about where all the ingredients were kosher, which means it was kosher meat, kosher spices, nothing, there was no meat and milk, everything that the goy used was kasher. Hakelim tzrichim hechshara. The kelim require now to be koshered. Shekol ma she'asu chachamim. Everything that the rabbis forbade, ke'en isura Torah asru, is similar to what the Torah forbade. Just like if there was a vessel, a utensil where forbidden foods were cooked, that vessel needs to be kosher. So too, vessels in which things were made which are rabbinically prohibited also require hechsher. But yes, there are those who say that the utensils don't need to be kosher, because the whole reason why we forbade non-Jews from cooking food for us is because we are worried about the closeness of relationship and maybe intermarriage. What was absorbed into the pots, we're not worried that that's going to lead to any close contact or intermarriage. Lemase, he says, halacha kedat machmirim. Really, the halacha is like those who are strict. Ve'keli shagoy bishel bo tzarich achshara be'hagala o belibun. And that keli needs to be koshered either by hagala, which is dipping into boiling water, or belibun, or whitening with fire. Aval b'diavad. However, after the fact, im avru ubishlu bekli belo achshara. If a person used that kli, use that dish, the utensil, that pot, that pan, without kosher it, hatafshil mutar. The dish, what you made, is still kosher. Omnam hakli adain asur beshimush ki lo hushar. But the vessel itself still needs to be kosher. I mean, you don't have permission to go on and continue using that vessel, that utensil. You need to kosher it first. Haya hakli shehagoy bishel bo mecheres. If the kli that the goy used was made out of ceramic. Now, what's interesting of ceramic is that if it ever becomes non-kosher, you cannot kosher it anymore. Maybe we'll get to that in a future class. So let's say a non-Jew used a ceramic utensil, like a tagine, for example, to cook food for himself, even though all the food in there was kosher. But like we just said, you need to kosher ceramic. You need to kosher your kli now. What do you do in a case of ceramic which cannot be koshered? Here he says, here we can be lenient to kosher the ceramic dish by hagala, putting it in boiling water 3 times. Even though if you ever cook something non-kosher in a ceramic dish, according to most poskim, there's no way you can kosher it. But here, beisud bishule goyim, when it comes to the cooking of foods from a non-Jew, which we again is founded on a prohibition of the rabbis. We can rely on the opinion that we can kosher a kli cheres, a ceramic utensil, 3 times with hagala in boiling water, and that is indeed the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And that's how we follow. So just to sum up, if a goy uses one of your kelim, one of your utensils, your pots, your pans to cook food, and there was no involvement, that the food itself is kosher b'diavad. You can eat from the food. However, the kli needs to be koshered. It needs to be koshered using the proper methods, either bet hagala, dipping in boiling water, or libun, or whitening with hot fire. And if it is a ceramic utensil, then it can be done with hagala 3 times. This concludes our class for this evening. Hope you can join us next time for another topic on our Kosher Curiosities series. Wishing everyone a wonderful night ahead. Be well.